Helena returned that afternoon with the sweet tiredness of someone returning from visiting her sister in Ribeirão Preto, thinking about putting on a load of laundry, making a coffee, and checking the mail. What she found in the garden stopped her in her tracks. Open cardboard boxes, ripped black bags, a duvet folded haphazardly on the wet grass, her shoes lined up like auction items. There were photo frames with cracked glass, a nearly empty bottle of perfume, the folder with medical records, the sewing basket with scattered needles. On top of a clear plastic box, a piece of paper with the son's recognizable handwriting. The mother-in-law and father-in-law needed the house and would move there. There was no signature or explanation. The blow wasn't just to pride, it was physical, a blow to the chest, shortness of breath, the awkward feeling of not knowing where to begin. After 42 years of being a full-time mother and grandmother, maintaining silence and putting out family fires, Helena found herself becoming a nuisance. She stood for a few seconds, her back straight out of habit and her gaze fixed on the damp-stained albums, trying to sort through the urgent matters, protecting documents, rescuing the photos, saving the medication. She clenched her hands to keep from trembling and felt the burning sensation of unjust shame, that heat that rises to your face when you're exposed without defense. The neighbor across the street, alerted by the mess, crossed to ask if she needed help. Helena nodded more out of inertia than determination. There were no shouts or scenes, just the sound of a box breaking and the crunch of an old photo being peeled back. The garden, which used to smell of earth and leaves, now smelled of neglect. In that silence, as she carefully moved aside a blanket knitted by her mother, she understood that no one would come to explain anything to her. And although she hadn't called him by that name yet, that was where her breaking point began. Helena gathered her strength to drag the boxes inside, but soon realized she had nowhere to carry anything inside. The keys, which always hung on a nail at the entrance, no longer turned in the lock. It had been changed. That certainty caused a pang of emptiness, as if she had been erased from her own history. She didn't cry in front of her neighbor, but inside, the mixture of humiliation and fear was a whirlwind. She remembered the breakfasts served in that kitchen, the birthday parties held in that yard, the arguments she had calmed between her son and daughter-in-law. And now everything was reduced to bags in the grass and a closed door. For years she had repeated that family comes first, and suddenly she discovered that for hers, she came last. With her hands still covered in dirt, she picked up her cell phone and dialed her sister Azira's number. She didn't know how to begin. She only managed to say that she couldn't go into the house and that all her things were outside. Her sister listened in silence for a few seconds and offered to come back, but Helena immediately refused. Something inside her refused to appear as a rescued victim. She didn't want to be seen as weak, even if she felt broken inside. In that instant, she remembered a secret patiently guarded for years. That small apartment bought with money from her pension and extra jobs, registered in her own name and unknown to anyone else. That memory was an anchor in the midst of the shipwreck. As the sun set and the shadows lengthened across the grass, she decided she wouldn't spend the night on the street or in someone else's house. She had a place to go, and that silent gesture would be her first form of response. With her heart still heavy, Helena gathered the most important things: documents, some clothes, and a small box containing old letters and photos. The rest remained there, a silent witness to the betrayal. She called a taxi and gave the address of that apartment that no one in the family knew about. The trip was short, but every stoplight seemed like an interrogation. How had she gotten to this point? At what point had she let trust turn to blindness? The taxi driver tried to start a conversation, but she only responded in monosyllables, clutching the box to her chest. When she arrived and opened the door to her own space, the smell of old paint and dust enveloped her. But instead of rejection, she felt relief. It was small, simple, but it was hers, and no one could throw her out. She didn't sleep much that night. The makeshift mattress on the floor, the streetlight filtering through the uncurtained blinds, and the echo of her own thoughts kept her awake. But amidst the insomnia, something different was born. a strange calm, a certainty that she had survived the worst blow and was still standing. She got up before dawn, made coffee on a portable stove, and as she sipped the bitter liquid from a cup borrowed from her neighbor, she promised herself she wouldn't allow herself to be erased from her own history. Still with trembling hands, she jotted down in a notebook what she should do. Contact a lawyer, legally register the situation, and above all, don't give in to the urge to demand explanations from those who had already shown they didn't value her presence. The next morning, with her notebook under her arm, Helena headed to the office of a lawyer recommended by a neighbor in the building. It wasn't the first time she'd entered a law firm, but it was the first time she wasn't accompanying her son or handling a domestic matter. This time she was there for her, and that difference mattered. Her hands trembled as she explained that the locks on her house had been changed and that there was a piece of paper in the middle where her own son justified the eviction. The lawyer listened attentively, reviewed the documents she had managed to rescue, and assured her that legally she had every right to decide about her home. That certainty reassured her somewhat, although the emotional wound remained raw. What shocked her most was hearing from a professional that she wasn't crazy, that she wasn't exaggerating, that what they had done was abuse. She left the studio with a folder of instructions, a list of legal steps, and for the first time in a long time, a sense of regaining control. She walked slowly to a nearby cafe, ordered a coffee with milk and toast, and opened her notebook. She wrote, "I am not a hindrance. I have my voice. I have my rights." Reviewing those sentences, she realized it was the first time she had recognized herself as the protagonist of her own life, not just a mother or grandmother who had to sustain everything. That morning, amid the clatter of cups and other people's conversations, she began to outline a silent plan. She wouldn't beg to return to the same house, but would look for a way out that would protect and dignify her. It was the beginning of a transformation she hadn't even imagined. The following 2 days were a whirlwind of paperwork and suppressed emotions. Helena returned, accompanied by a bailiff, to find that the lock had been changed and that her belongings were still exposed to neglect. It was hard to see her own living room occupied by her son's in-laws, as if nothing had happened, as if she had never existed there. But she didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She took note of everything and let the proceedings take their course. That calm surprised even the bailiff, who commented that few people remained so composed in such situations. What he didn't know was that Helena had discovered a new kind of strength, the kind that comes when you no longer have anything to lose and at the same time have everything to rebuild. At the same time, she began to truly settle into the apartment. She bought a new mattress, a small table, and some cheap curtains, and little by little, the space ceased to be just a hiding place and became a home. Every purchase, no matter how small, reminded her that she was investing in herself, something she hadn't done in decades. With the advice of her lawyer, she began the process of selling the main house, a move that surprised everyone and put her son and daughter-in-law against the wall. Helena wasn't seeking revenge. She was looking to close a cycle with dignity. The idea of getting rid of that house burdened with painful memories frightened her, but it also liberated her. It was a necessary break to leave behind the role of invisible woman that her family had assigned her. When the house sale finally went through, Helena felt an immense weight fall from her shoulders. It wasn't a simple process. There were arguments, attempts at persuasion, and even cruel reproaches from her own son. But she remained steadfast, remembering every sleepless night, every tear shed in front of the boxes dumped in the garden. She spent part of the money from the sale on securing her future, and part on small things that brought her pleasure. A painting class she had always put off, new clothes she chose without asking anyone, and enrollment in a support group for older adults who had experienced family abandonment. Arriving at the first meeting, she didn't know what to expect, but she soon discovered she was not alone in her grief. There, she met women and men with stories as difficult as her own. One of the first to speak was 72-year-old Doña Celia, who recounted how her own children tried to put her in a nursing home to take over her home. She firmly recounted how she sought legal support, proved her lucidity, and won the case, albeit at the cost of breaking bonds that seemed indestructible. Helena listened attentively, recognizing herself in every word. It was in that environment, surrounded by people who shared similar wounds, that she began to feel shame transform into strength. And precisely at that moment, when the voices of these women resonated with so much pain and so much truth, the first opportunity for connection appeared. If you're reading this far, please comment from where you're joining us. This space is yours too, and your voice matters. At another meeting, Rosa spoke. She explained how her children had pressured her into an institution, disguising what was actually a strategy to take over her home as care. She said that for a long time she believed their story, until she discovered it was all about asset manipulation. Her words held a mirror up to everyone. What many families call protection is always nothing more than a disguise for selfishness. Helena felt a lump in her throat as she listened to her story. She recognized in that story the same dynamics of devaluation she had suffered. It wasn't an isolated case, but a painful pattern. In that same group, she met Don Antonio, a man who, when he fell ill, was practically abandoned by his children. He recounted that while he worked and contributed money, he was always welcome at family gatherings, but as soon as he became dependent, they pushed him away as if he were in the way. The silence in the room after his words was heavy, and Helena reflected that cruelty sometimes doesn't require shouting, but rather the simple absence of those who should be there. That meeting left a profound mark on her. She stopped asking herself, "Why me?" and began to understand that it was a much broader issue. And amid the collective pain, a solidarity began to emerge that would be key to her transformation. In the following meetings, Helena also listened to Doña Carmen. She recounted how, after a lifetime of supporting her children, she was discarded when they achieved economic stability. They no longer needed her, and with that financial independence came indifference. Doña Carmen spoke with a calmness that touched everyone, describing how intergenerational ingratitude can be as devastating as any illness. Helena felt those words strike at the same place where the wound was still raw. The sacrifice erased, the love taken for granted. However, instead of sinking, she understood that these shared experiences became a mirror of resilience. The group's organizer, Lourdes, shared that she had gone through something very similar to Helena's. She explained that her own wounds inspired the idea of creating this support space, because she understood that loneliness was the most fertile ground for despair. In a firm voice, she said that family abandonment should not translate into resignation, but rather into unity. That phrase stayed with Helena, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to smile. She left the meeting feeling that she was not only regaining confidence, but also a sense of purpose. There she began to understand that she was not a passive victim, but a woman who could rebuild her life from a different place, accompanied by those who had learned to survive the same pain. One of those afternoons, over coffee after the meeting, Helena met Dona Aparecida, a 73-year-old widow, who had decided to travel around Brazil after the death of her husband. She told me that she had discovered through travel a freedom she never thought possible in old age. New landscapes, new friendships, the certainty that life could be reinvented without depending on anyone's approval. Helena listened to her fascinated, feeling how each word opened a different window within her. It was then that she understood that she could also give another meaning to her time, that age was not an obstacle, but the perfect excuse to leave behind the shadow of submission. Shortly after, she met Joaquim, a 70-year-old retiree who had set out to explore every beach along the São Paulo coast. With an infectious smile, he explained how retirement wasn't an end, but a beginning filled with simple yet deeply meaningful projects. Helena, who for years had lived without allowing herself to dream beyond family routines, saw herself reflected in his enthusiasm. She left that meeting with a restless mind, and, upon arriving back at her apartment, she began writing a list of things she had always wanted to do: resume her studies, travel, learn something new. Helena began taking small but steady steps. She enrolled in an art history course at a university open to seniors. On the first day, upon entering the classroom full of strangers, she felt a tingle of nerves, as if she were 20 again. She listened attentively to each of the professor's explanations and took careful notes, discovering a pleasure she had forgotten, that of learning for herself, without the pressure of serving anyone else. That academic routine became a refuge and a reminder that she could still build something new. Each class was a building block in the reconstruction of her identity. At the same time, she began participating in volunteer activities organized by the same support group. They visited nursing homes where many had no family to support them, and there Helena found another source of strength. Listening to these people's stories, holding their hands and giving them a little time, gave her unexpected energy. She was struck by the realization that, even after abandonment, she could be useful, could make a difference in the lives of others. That sense of purpose was completely different from the previous obligation. It was no longer about silent sacrifices, but about freely choosing who to support and how. As the months passed, Helena transformed her apartment into a true home. She bought a bookshelf to house books and plants, hung light-colored curtains that let in the morning sun, and framed some of the photos she had rescued from her previous home. Each object, chosen with her own hands, became a symbol of independence. She learned to enjoy the silence, to prepare her breakfast without rushing, and to walk around the neighborhood with the peace of mind that came with being accountable to no one. What was initially a makeshift refuge ended up being the setting for a rebirth that not even she had foreseen. The new routine also allowed her to expand her social circle. During the course, she met a group of women her age who shared similar interests. They would meet after class to chat at a nearby cafe, and those conversations turned into moments of laughter and connection. For the first time in a long time, Helena felt she could talk about herself without fear of being judged or ridiculed. Over cups of coffee and notebooks full of notes, plans for short trips, museum visits, and even collective writing projects began to emerge. The woman who had been expelled from her own home was beginning to discover that life could also offer her new friendships and a different, more genuine and free sense of belonging. Encouraged by these new friendships, Helena agreed to participate in a cultural trip organized by the university. It was the first time in decades that she had boarded a bus with a group of classmates, not as someone's chaperone, but as the protagonist of her own experience. They visited a historic city, and as she walked along cobblestone streets and listened to tour guides' stories, she reflected on how much she had changed in such a short time. From being a woman discarded by her family, she had become a curious traveler, open-minded about her surroundings. That trip was a turning point. She understood that life could be exciting even at 68. The trip also taught her to let go of her fears. During a group dinner, she dared to share part of her personal story. She spoke of her son's betrayal, of being dispossessed, of the night she slept on a makeshift mattress, and how all of this pushed her to reinvent herself. To her surprise, she didn't receive looks of pity, but of respect. Some colleagues even shared similar experiences of family rejection. This sincere exchange reinforced the idea that she was not alone and that her story could serve as inspiration. She returned to her apartment with a mixture of physical exhaustion and emotional fulfillment, convinced that every step she took was an act of recovery and dignity. Little by little, Helena began to leave behind the feeling of shame that had plagued her since the day she found her things in the yard. Now she looked in the mirror with different eyes. She no longer saw just her relegated mother or grandmother, but a woman capable of forging a new path. She also enrolled in dance classes for older adults, and although at first she felt clumsy and uncoordinated, she ended up laughing at herself and enjoying the movement. She discovered that she didn't need to be perfect, that simply trying was enough to restore joy to her body and confidence to her spirit. Every step on the dance floor was a reminder that she was still alive and entitled to enjoy herself. At the same time, she began writing a diary. There she poured out her thoughts, her progress, and even her fears, but with a different clarity. No longer from guilt, but from the desire to record herself. In those pages, she wrote the phrase that became her motto: "It's never too late to start over." That notebook became her most faithful companion, tangible proof that transformation occurred not only in external events, but also in the way she understood and valued herself. Each written word confirmed that she was no longer invisible and that her story was just beginning to take a direction she had chosen. One day, Doña Lourdes invited her to share her testimony in the support group. At first, she hesitated. She didn't consider herself a strong person, much less someone who could inspire others. But she accepted, and when she stood before those attentive faces, she recounted with a trembling voice how she had found her belongings thrown in the garden, how she had spent her first night on a mattress on the floor, and how, little by little, she had decided to rebuild herself. As she spoke, she noticed that many people's eyes filled with tears, not from sorrow, but from empathy. It was then that she realized that telling her story was also part of healing. When she finished, several people approached her to thank her for her courage. That night, returning to her apartment, Helena felt a different lightness, as if she had finally let go of some of the weight she was carrying. She understood that the shared pain was becoming more bearable, and that her story could be a bridge for others still trapped in despair. With a shy smile, she reflected that she would never have imagined herself speaking in front of a group at 68, much less being listened to with such respect. In that moment, she reaffirmed her determination to move forward, convinced that age was not a limit, but an opportunity to reinvent oneself. As the months passed, Helena became one of the group's most active voices. She not only shared her experience but also listened patiently to the new members, offering words of encouragement without judgment. She discovered she had a natural ability to share grief, perhaps because she knew firsthand the feeling of being discarded. This new facet gave her a clearer purpose. She no longer lived to please those who never valued her, but to lean on a community that understood what it meant to rebuild from the ashes. Meanwhile, her daily life continued to flourish. She began traveling in small groups of retirees, touring nearby cities and enjoying landscapes she'd previously only seen in magazines. She took photos, tried traditional foods, and even dared to upload them to social media with the help of a friend. She was surprised to receive messages from strangers thanking her for sharing her energy and her story. And in that same spirit of connection, she reminded those following her story from afar. If you've made it this far, please leave your support with a like and share this story. It may be just what someone needs to read today. The change was also reflected in her health. Initially, doctors had warned her that the stress of the eviction could affect her blood pressure and mobility. But with her new routine of walking, classes, and volunteering, Helena began to feel stronger. Her sleepless nights diminished, and the anxiety that had previously caused her to grind her teeth gave way to a serene calm. Even her posture changed. She no longer walked hunched over or with her eyes lowered, but with her head held high, like someone who knew she was in control of her destiny. This transformation wasn't miraculous, but the result of every small decision she had made to choose life over resignation. On one of those morning walks in the park, she came across a group of older adults practicing Tai Chi. At first, she just watched from a distance, but she was soon invited to join in. The slow, coordinated movements seemed difficult, but they also brought her an unexpected peace. She began attending every week, and the practice became another of her self-care rituals. There, the past, abandonment, and betrayal didn't matter. The only things that mattered were breathing, balance, and being present in the moment. Helena realized that she could also learn to live like this, focused on the present, unchallenged by what she could no longer change. Over time, Helena was encouraged to take a step further. She traveled alone for the first time. She chose a nearby city, booked a modest hotel, and planned every detail without consulting anyone. This sense of autonomy was new and exciting. She walked through squares, visited a museum, and even allowed herself dinner at a restaurant with live music. She didn't need company to enjoy herself. She discovered she could sit down with a plate of pasta and feel fulfilled just by watching the people go by. That brief getaway became a personal milestone. She understood that freedom didn't have to be a distant dream, but a concrete practice within reach of her choices. Upon her return, she shared her experience in the support group and was greeted with applause and smiles. Many told her that her example encouraged them to try something similar. Helena realized she was no longer just another participant, but a role model for those still struggling to overcome abandonment. This realization moved her deeply, because a year ago she had barely been able to drag her things from a damp garden to a taxi. Now she was a woman who traveled, learned, taught, and, above all, had rediscovered her lost dignity. Helena also returned to a passion that had been shelved for decades: sewing. She rescued the old basket of needles and scraps of fabric from the boxes and began making small pieces that she later donated to a community center. This activity, once a domestic obligation, transformed into a chosen and meaningful pastime. As she sewed, she remembered her mother and felt that each stitch was an act of continuity and memory, but now from a different place. Not of sacrifice, but of choice. In each finished garment, she found a mixture of pride and calm, as if she were also stitching together the fragments of her own life. In the same spirit, she was encouraged to organize basic workshops for other women in the support group. These weren't formal classes, but gatherings among friends where they shared techniques, conversations, and laughter. Those afternoons were filled with color and confidences, and little by little, Helena discovered that teaching also strengthened her. Seeing others learn thanks to her patience and experience gave her a sense of usefulness that had nothing to do with the old role of complacent mother. It was a different, more genuine recognition that nourished her self-esteem and confirmed that there was a new place for her in the world. The calendar moved forward, and almost without realizing it, Helena celebrated her first year living in her apartment. Instead of nostalgia, the date brought her gratitude. She had managed to reinvent herself despite the initial pain. She invited some friends from the course and support group to a simple snack at her house. She made coffee and cakes and arranged the chairs in the small living room. During the meeting, they laughed, shared anecdotes, and even made plans for a future trip together. Helena looked around and thought it had been a while since she had felt such sincere human warmth. They weren't blood ties, but they were the family she had chosen, built on mutual respect and companionship. On that personal anniversary, she also allowed herself to look back without fear. She remembered the image of her belongings in the garden, her son's ticket, the changed lock, and she understood that this pain had been the spark of her rebirth. She no longer mourned what she had lost, but was grateful for having discovered the strength she carried within. She promised herself that she would never again allow herself to be treated as a burden. Inspired by this new phase, Helena decided to expand her horizons even further. She signed up for an organized trip for seniors to various historic cities in southern Brazil. During the tour, she was surprised by her own energy. She walked along cobblestone streets, listened to stories from guides, and participated in every activity with enthusiasm. In group photos, she appeared smiling, with the bright eyes of someone who feels part of something again. This experience confirmed that she had not only regained her independence, but also the joy of exploring the unknown. Upon her return, many in the support group wanted to hear every detail of her trip. Helena recounted the traditional foods she had tried, the new friends she had made, and even the small difficulties she had overcome on her own. She noticed that her voice no longer trembled when she spoke in public. She spoke with confidence, conveying hope. Some companions confided that her story motivated them to dare to live new experiences. Helena understood then that she had come full circle. From being a silent victim, she had become a source of inspiration. This awareness gave her peace and pride, and reinforced her resolve to never again allow herself to be defined by devaluation. In the following months, Helena found the courage to give talks at community centers where older adults gathered. She didn't use a prepared speech or elaborate words, but rather recounted her experience simply as she had lived it. Every time she mentioned her son's betrayal, she still felt a small lump in her throat, but it was no longer a paralyzing pain. It was a healed wound that she could now display as an example of resilience. Many people approached her afterward to thank her, telling her that her words had given them the strength to face similar challenges. This new facet led her to understand that her life had taken a completely different direction. What had once been a routine of care and silence transformed into a time filled with learning, travel, and encounters. She realized she had built a more solid identity, no longer based on pleasing, but on choosing. She even began to save clippings and photos of all her activities in a special album she called My Rebirth. Each page was tangible proof that it's never too late to regain dignity and happiness. Helena also strengthened her relationship with technology. With the help of one of her new friends, she learned to use her cell phone better and participate in online groups where older adults shared experiences. There, she discovered that her story resonated not only in her city, but also in other parts of the country. People she had never met before sent her messages of support and shared similar experiences, reinforcing the idea that abandonment and devaluation were common wounds, but also that there was a network willing to support them. This virtual connection became another source of companionship and learning. At the same time, she began writing short texts that she published on these forums. They weren't long or embellished, just sincere accounts of what she'd been through and how she'd rebuilt herself. To her surprise, she received many grateful comments, especially from women who hadn't yet dared to take the first step. This response confirmed that she had found a greater purpose. Her experience wasn't confined to her own circle, but could inspire strangers to rise up. With each post, she reinforced the certainty that she hadn't been discarded, but rather redirected toward a path where she was truly valued. One day, while organizing the boxes of memories she had kept, Helena found a photo of herself as a young woman, surrounded by her son and her deceased husband. For a few seconds, sadness overwhelmed her, but then she looked around her apartment, filled with new life, and realized she had survived the unthinkable. That photo wasn't a reminder of loss, but rather proof of how much she had grown. She decided to save it in her My Rebirth album, not to cling to the past, but to remember the distance she had traveled since that afternoon when her belongings were thrown into the garden. That night, she wrote a reflection in her diary that life doesn't always give second chances, but that she had learned to make them. She no longer waited for someone else to give her permission to be happy. She knew that respect isn't something you ask for. It's built with firm decisions and the courage to start over. She closed the notebook with the feeling that, at 68, she had finally understood the true meaning of independence. And although loneliness sometimes appeared suddenly, she no longer experienced it as a punishment, but as a space where she could listen to herself and choose herself. As the weeks passed, Helena decided to embark on a longer trip, this time to another state. The bus ride, the nights in simple hotels, and the walks through unfamiliar places filled her with enthusiasm. Every detail, from tasting a typical dish to talking with people of different ages, reinforced the idea that there was much to discover beyond the pain. She no longer felt fear but curiosity. She took notes in her travel journal and took photos with her cell phone, creating her own memories that depended on no one. Upon her return, she shared everything with the support group. She recounted funny anecdotes, lessons learned, and also moments of difficulty she had managed to overcome on her own. Seeing the admiration in her classmates' eyes gave her a satisfaction that was hard to describe. She understood that her testimony was no longer just a story of overcoming pain, but a concrete example of how to transform adversity into opportunity. That certainty filled her with serene pride. She had gone from being a victim to becoming someone who lit the path for others. Looking back, Helena understood that the day she found her belongings dumped in the garden was the beginning of a new life. What at the time seemed like a devastating ending became the gateway to a freer, more authentic life. She was no longer the invisible woman living in the shadow of family demands, but someone capable of choosing, learning, and enjoying life with dignity. Her story became proof that it's never too late to stand up and demand respect, even if betrayal comes from those who should care for us most. Today, at 69, Helena continues to travel, study, and participate in the support group. Her days are filled with simple yet meaningful projects that remind her that life doesn't end with abandonment or pain. Each new experience is a reminder that age isn't a limit, but rather an opportunity to redefine who you are and what you want. And with that certainty, every time she shares her story, she repeats the same phrase that has become her hallmark. It's never too late to start over.